The Hawks are up 22-15 over Memphis as we head to the second quarter, and it is Black History Month, and the Hawks and the Black Fives Foundation have teamed up this month to highlight Atlanta's historical contributions to the game of basketball prior to integration. And we're lucky to have Claude Johnson, the executive director of the Black Fives Foundation. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, first of all, tell us about your foundation a little bit.
Sure. Well, it's the Black Fives Foundation. We're a public charity, and we research and preserve and promote and teach the history of African Americans in basketball prior to the NBA. And we also advocate for those pioneers for their proper recognition.
So when was this era in Atlanta?
This was around 1904 all the way up through 1950, which was when the NBA signed its first black players.
Wow. Okay, so first of all, about the game back then, there were different rules, different everything, right?
Yes, that's right. So there were dozens of African-American teams, and they played all over the country, but mostly in the Northeast and in the Midwest. And the rules were almost the same, but there were some things about it, including the gear, that were a little different. So right over here, we have a couple of those items. We have a collection of artifacts in our archives, almost 500 of them. And this item right here is a basketball that's over 100 years old. So, you know, the Hawks have been playing here in Atlanta for almost 50 years, but basketball has been around in this city for over a century. This
looks like a football.
It does, but it's actually a round basketball. And you notice one thing, it doesn't have a needle hole. And that's because you had to untie the laces, and inside there's a rubber bladder with a hose, and you had to take that hose and blow it up by mouth, and then fold it back over and relace it, bounce test it. But guess what? What if it wasn't quite right? You had to do what? Start over from scratch and do it whole thing again. So the rules were different, a little bit the same, but the ball and the gear was definitely different. I have another example of gear that was different. These are some state-of-the-art basketball shoes from also over 100 years ago. And you'll notice that they're leather and canvas. They're handmade. They're hand cobbled by a shoemaker, and they're leather bottom. So they didn't even have a rubber sole back then. And they didn't have rubber soles really until about the 1910s and early 1920s. That's when, you know, some of the basketball companies started innovating in that way.
So I would definitely sprain my ankle and probably have a couple of busted knees if I wore them.
I don't know, because, you know, we were talking with Malcolm Delaney yesterday, and he said he'd wear these if somebody made a custom pair for them. So, you know, I was asking around, and, you know, in Savile Row and places like that in London, you can get somebody to make all this stuff for you custom made. I'd wear them too.
Now, back in the day, in the early 1900s, where was basketball played around the city? There were a handful of locations, right?
That's right. So a couple of them. Up in Vine City, there was a place called the Sunset Casino and Amusement Park, which for decades was where all of the African-American entertainers and basketball teams that visited Atlanta would play. So that was one place. It was on the corner of Magnolia and Sunset. Another place was the Atlanta Municipal Auditorium and Armory, which is at the corner of Gilmer and Portland, right over by Georgia State. It's that big building over there, and that was also a destination of choice for visiting African-American basketball teams. And then you had the Butler Street Colored YMCA, not far from there, which was the place where thousands of youngsters learned and honed their skills in basketball, including Atlanta native and future Hall of Fame member Walt Clyde Frazier. Plus, you had the HBCUs that played a significant role. And so Clark and Morris Brown and Morehouse had basketball teams that dated back to 1909.
Well, it's just fascinating to learn the history of this, and thank you so much for bringing it to the forefront and sharing it with us today, Claude.
You're welcome. We have a motto, make history now. It's bring this history to life, but also a call to action for what we can do today. We always have a choice right now in this moment. So let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, Bob and Dominique, back to you guys.
Well, I would say, Bob, I remember you wearing those shoes back when I was in high school, senior. You was calling the games.
Why do you blow my cover? You are
Bob,
so
you
jealous.
remember those?
I do, and it took forever to lace them up.
That's a pregame warm-up in itself.
Yeah, to start like at 3 in the afternoon. 24-21 Hawks as Delaney fires and misses a three.